One for Mum, one for Dad, and one for the country.
And there has never been a more exciting time to be an Australian.
Budgets are about choices, Fran, and you show what you value through the choices you make.
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared.
The Treasurer knows.
I want an economy that works for people, not the other way around.
We'll just end up being a third-rate economy, a banana republic.
Just follow the money.
G'day, and welcome to Follow the Money, the Australia Institute's podcast that puts the big economic issues in plain English. I'm Ebony Bennett, Deputy Director at the Australia Institute, and today we're bringing you our post-budget analysis, featuring Executive Director Richard Dennis, Matt Grudnoff, our Senior Economist, and Eliza Littleton, Senior Economist at the Centre for Future Work.
Well, there's a lot to unpack in the budget this morning.
The Treasurer is hoping his budget will ease the cost of living crisis.
We are back in the black.
Mr. Speaker, the budget we present to the Australian people tonight provides cost of living relief that is responsible and affordable and prioritises those most in need.
$500 in energy bill relief and a 15% increase to rent assistance.
1.1 million Australians on JobSeeker and other benefits will get an extra $20 a week.
JobSeeker tonight is still a poverty payment. It is still the lowest unemployment payment in the OECD.
Big money is also being spent to encourage more doctors to bulk bill.
It was a game changer for GPs and our patients.
The budget is a betrayal of renters, job seekers and people doing it tough.
The tax take is going up on gas exports.
The fact of the matter is a drover's dog could have delivered this surplus.
I mean, you can't pay your rent with a surplus.
The budget was a chance for the Treasurer to reset Labor's brand as economic managers.
The budget is completely silent on the stage 3 tax cuts. Why is it the Voldemort of the budget?
I commend this bill and this budget to the House.
Jim Chalmers has just delivered his second budget. The last one was billed as a bread and butter budget, and in this budget the Treasurer was really trying to provide cost of living relief without causing rising inflation. So he's delivered quite a modest budget surplus, first time in a long time, something the Coalition was unable to do in its last term of office. But long-term supporters of the Australia Institute will know budget surpluses should never be the be-all and end-all, so we'll unpack that a little. And there were also probably quite few tax reforms that experts were looking for in this budget, with some extremely modest changes to the PRRT and the stage 3 tax cuts for high income earners remaining in there. So to discuss all this and more, I'm joined by the Australia Institute's Executive Director, Richard Dennis. Richard and I both have coughs today, so you'll have to excuse me. I've got a cough lolly in my... Matt Grudnoff at the end is our Senior Economist at the Australia Institute, and Eliza Littleton is Senior Economist at the Centre for Future Work at the Australia Institute. Hello, everyone.
Hey, Eb.
I feel like I'm hosting a project or something. This is very exciting for me. Richard, I did want to start with you. What's your overall takeaway from the budget?
Look, it's a real steady-as-she-goes budget, but we're in uncharted waters. And pretty much everything... So let's go back to when the stage 3 tax cuts were announced 6 years ago. Since the stage 3 tax cuts were announced, we've had COVID, we've had a war in Europe, we've had the highest inflation in ages, we've seen the biggest fall in real wages. So we're in really uncharted territory. We've got some big problems, climate change, inequality, but this budget is really steady as she goes. And while the surplus was a surprise to some, to be clear, the surplus came because of what the world economy did to Australia, not because of what Jim Chalmers did to the budget. So, the headlines are great for them. The Coalition never managed to deliver a surplus. So politically, let's not underestimate the significance of this. The Liberals will now find it hard to say the Liberals are the party of surpluses and Labor are reckless spenders, because the Liberals never delivered a budget surplus and Chalmers just delivered one. So that's politically significant. But from an economic point of view, this is rounding error stuff. And unfortunately, the big announcements in the budget really aren't nearly big enough to suit the problems. The word environment wasn't mentioned. Tanya Plibersek had said we need to spend billions to stop endangered species going extinct. Whoops, forgot about that. Or we're going to tax the gas industry. we're going to collect a whole $600 million a year from the PRRT. Well, as Matt pointed out last night, we're getting more from making cigarettes more expensive than we are from making one of the most profitable industries in the world pay more tax. And then there's JobKeeper. Of course it's great that we're giving them $2.55 a day extra. That's a lot better than giving them nothing, but it's nothing like what their own recent inquiry said we needed. So politically, the surplus will matter a lot. Economically, this is not a budget that says a new government is dealing with new problems that have emerged. It's very steady as she goes.
So along those lines, Matt, one of the things the Treasurer, who hasn't really bragged much about the surplus, to be honest, and been given plenty of opportunities to do so, but one of the things that the government talked about managing was targeting cost of living relief at people while also managing inflation. How do you go on that front?
Yeah, well, I don't think he's bragging, because I don't know whether when people are suffering from cost of living pressures, they're going to be particularly interested in the budget, the government bragging about a surplus. But, the government's trying to juggle two things. It's trying to help people who need the most help with the cost of living crisis, and at the same time not pump lots of money recklessly into the economy and create more inflation, because then all that will happen is the RBA will come along and go, thank you very much, we're going to increase interest rates more, and so that'll make it worse. And I think largely they've done a reasonably good job in that. When you look at all of the policy changes, it works out at about 0.5% of GDP over the next year, when inflation's supposed to be coming down but still reasonably high. That's $1 in every 200. That's hardly going to set off a massive increase in inflation. So, economists out there will be asked, is it inflationary? Well, yeah, every dollar extra is probably inflationary, but are you ever going to notice it or be able to measure it? Probably not. So, it's a reasonable balance. If you're actually concerned about inflation, there is a much larger elephant in the room, and that's the enormous stage 3 tax cuts that come in next year. They're going to add a huge amount to stimulate the economy by pumping tens of billions of dollars into the economy. And yet the people who seem most concerned about inflationary pressures also seem to be the least concerned about the stage 3 tax cuts.
Yeah. And also the people that might be earning those incomes, just coincidentally.
Yeah, exactly right.
And not to mention the profits and the contribution the profits are making to,
That's
to
right.
inflation.
We've got a couple of things on our social media this week about bank profits in particular, if you want to check those out on our Twitter account. Eliza, Finance Minister Katie Gallagher, we heard quite a lot in the lead up to the budget about what this budget would deliver for women. What are some of the things that were targeted towards women in this budget, and do they go far enough?
Yeah, well, similar to, I think, a lot of other kind of spending areas that are, they were targeted spending at some of the most disadvantaged women, which is really good to see, I think. But of course, they didn't go far enough to, I think, address gender inequality in Australia. Not that we were expecting that. But one thing that really did strike me when I was reading through the women's budget statement on budget night was that the government spent a lot of time and space patting themselves on the back for the things they've already done for women. Including making childcare more affordable or slightly more affordable through increasing the subsidy, extending paid parental leave, and improving pay transparency in organisations. So there was a lot of, we've already done this. But some of the things that we did see on the night were the things that were already leaked. So, expanding the single parenting payment for single parents who are mostly women up until the age of, their child is up at the age of 14. They axed the Parents Next program, which is a kind of a punitive mutual obligations system for parents on the parenting payment. They also, and one of the really good and big things that they did was dedicated funding directly to lifting aged care worker wages by 15%, and that is a really good thing. The Economic Equality Task Force made some recommendations to the minister before the budget, and these were many of the things on that list, which is great. I think we would have liked to see this pay rise expanded across the care economy to other care workers as well. That would have been a really good thing to see, something that would have really lifted wages for women. And of course, yeah, it's great that they're making movements in the right direction, but probably not enough. I mean, the other thing was the job seeker raising the rate for people over 55, which they said targeted women who are long-term unemployed on the benefit as well. So definitely targeted, but yeah, not enough at this stage.
So just on that, I mean, the government's right that there is a lot of long-term unemployment amongst the older people, but why not make it for anyone who's been unemployed for a long period of time? Like, it's a bit weird to say, because people over 55 are more likely to be long-term unemployed, let's help everyone over 55. If long-term unemployment was your concern, why not help people who are long-term unemployed?
Presumably Centrelink has access to that information.
Correct. So, yeah, it's this kind of, on the one hand, it looks targeted, but it's not actually targeted. You know, if long-term unemployment's the problem, there are young long-term unemployed people who completely are missed by this targeting.
Yeah. Matt, I wondered if I could just pick up on a couple of those other cost of living measures that we saw. So there was things like tripling the Medicare benefit to encourage bulk billing, and kind of a number of other measures, including helping with energy bills and things like that. What kinds of things were directly targeted at cost of living in particular?
Yeah, so probably the biggest one was the energy bills. So they're going to basically take $500 off certain people if you qualify their electricity and other energy bills. And that's actually done that way in order to actually reduce consumer inflation. So we measure consumer inflation through the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, and it's what consumers pay. So if the government sort of steps in and, you know, takes a big chunk out of your bill, that actually reduces how much I as a consumer pay, which reduces the Consumer Price Index, the inflation. And so it's done in that way in order to temporarily, at least, because obviously when the subsidy doesn't happen next time, the prices go back up. But it's designed to temporarily bring down inflation, particularly in this year going into next year when it's supposed to remain high. And it's the same with GP bulk billing. If more GPs bulk bill, then how much I pay as a consumer goes down, right? Like I don't have to now pay a gap, and so therefore the cost of going to see the doctor has gone down, so therefore the CPI goes down.
But it's not exactly the same as getting a check for $50 or $500 in the mail and thinking, oh, I've got to save that for the next time I go to the doctor. So in that way, it's kind of directly targeting the cost of living pressure without trying to... without being inflationary.
Well, because it is actually... Here goes my voice. So, yeah, Matt's right. The way we measure inflation is literally we go and look at the price of stuff. And during during COVID, the government made childcare free. The price of childcare is included in the Consumer Price Index.
That reduced the Consumer Price Index in that quarter by about 1%.
Right,
because so inflation fell by a full 1%. And the next quarter, when they stopped making it free, it went back up by 1%.
So we talk about inflation like it's this big hypothetical thing. It's the price of stuff. And sure, the Reserve Bank can increase interest rates, make people poor, and then poor people go to the shops less and buy less stuff, so shops don't put the price of stuff up. That's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is to drop the price of stuff. And when government controls the price of childcare, when government controls the price of going to doctor, when government controls the price of getting medicine, when it controls the price of getting a university degree... There are these things that the government has complete control over, which when it drops the price of them, when the Bureau of Statistics goes and measures the prices of things, oh, guess what? When you drop the price of things falls. And then and then the Reserve Bank doesn't have to change interest rates. So, yeah, look, I think, the government could have gone further. The Australia Institute's been making this point, since last year, saying, what if we used fiscal policy, that is spending policy, to drop the price of things government controls? That would make the RBA's job easier. The RBA's been ignoring our advice, but, happy to see the Treasurer taking
also, it. Not only does it do that, but it helps poorer individuals.
Absolutely.
You can target that, and so you're reducing inflation, but you're not punishing people on lower incomes.
Yeah, so you're reducing inequality, reducing inflation, not putting pressure on the RBA to jack up interest rates. And look, frankly, people should listen to us more often.
Eliza, Richard mentioned there the cost of an education as something being the government has control over. We know that HECS goes up with indexation, but what else was in this budget for young people? We've heard a little bit about the targeting job seeker payments for people over 55. What was in this budget for young people?
Not a lot. Again, similar theme to the other types of cost of living measures. They were really targeted, and young people, will benefit from some of these measures for sure. So, they are a particularly vulnerable group, earning on average less than the rest of the working population. I think it's like on average 13% less, which is what we'd expect to see somewhat for someone kind of starting out. But it does mean the cost of living crisis is particularly harsh for those groups of people because they've got less financial buffer to be able to keep up with the rising prices. So what did we see? Well, across the board, and the income payments, including youth allowance and job seeker, they'll go up by $40 a fortnight, which I think is something we kind of heard just before the budget. But, and this is great, of course, those payments did really desperately need a raise, but it's not really by enough. It's not going to make much of a dent. They're still, both payments are both still far below the poverty line. The job seeker rate will, after these changes, still be 41% below the poverty line. The youth allowance rate, which is actually lower, will be 51% below the poverty line. So, it is good to see, but of course, at the end of the day, these are seriously inadequate payments, not just a little bit inadequate, that can be improved by $40 a fortnight. The other major thing was a raise to the Commonwealth rent assistance by 15%, which sounds like a lot, but the kind of maximum base rate of the Commonwealth rent assistance was actually so low to begin with that only results in an additional $31 a fortnight. So I'm not really sure how much of a dent it's going to make on affordability of housing. And of course, housing is a really big expense for young people. We know that the Economic Inclusion Advisory Committee said that for 75% of people on youth allowance in 2021, they were experiencing housing stress, meaning they spent over 30% of their income on housing. So it is a really serious problem that won't just go away as a result of this.
And let's go back to the targeting. I mean, I said before, older people are more likely to be long-term unemployed, so we help all the older people with that. Eliza's just told us that young people earn less than everyone else. Well, we all know that, but they don't get a discount when they go to rent a house.
Yeah.
So if we were serious about this idea of targeting, we'd have more rent assistance for young people because the gap between what they earn and the price of rent is bigger.
Yeah.
But no, it seems like it's okay to target things to older workers, older unemployed people on the basis they're more likely to be disadvantaged. But with young people, they got young people's wages, but everybody else's rents. And, whoops, we're just ignoring that one.
And zooming back out even, right? Playing these two disadvantaged groups off each other is like completely missing the point. And the fact that in context that we can't afford to raise income payments across the board for everyone in a substantial way because we don't have enough revenue. And actually, we're not going to have enough revenue because of stage 3 income tax cuts, which mostly go to the rich and to privileged people. So really, that's the playoff I think we need to start talking about. But you're right, the Treasurer also missed an opportunity to freeze or abolish HECS indexation, which will go up an eye-watering 7.1% in June this year.
Yeah, it's a huge amount. Just while we're on stage 3, Richard, obviously the Australia Institute and many, many other people have been hugely critical of them. We thought they were a bad idea at the time and an even worse idea now. Nothing in this budget on stage 3 or repealing it or changing it.
The words are not even mentioned in all of the budget papers.
So on Insider's post-budget panel last night, Samantha Maiden called it the Voldemort of the budget, that public servants weren't even supposed to talk about it. Why would that be?
Yeah, I liked Insiders After Dark. So I guess, if we want to read the tea leaves, usually a government would, in the middle of a cost of living crisis, be bragging, saying, hey, don't forget those giant, big, juicy tax cuts that are going to kick in next year. That
aren't we great? We're giving you lots of tax cuts.
I think it was no accident that there was just strategic silence on that. So that's the optimist in me. The pessimist in me is these tax cuts, which were created back when Scott Morrison was Treasurer. Like, that's how long...
Even before he was... Right, it was 2018.
Right?
Don't make me laugh, I'll cough.
Treasurer Scott Morrison cooked these up. Treasurer Scott Morrison assured us we could afford them. Treasurer Scott Morrison, and, to his credit, he never lied or misled us about anything. So, we were probably right to go along with him. He assured us that steady economic growth would pay for these things. These were unfunded tax cuts that were
we
just...
had a pandemic between then and there.
Exactly, and everything's changed since then. So the optimist in me thinks that the economic and political case for these tax cuts is so bad that... and what the Australian Institute did some polling last year and actually said to people, look, the government's promised these tax cuts. They went to an election promising them, but the circumstances have changed. Would you prefer them to keep a promise or do what the economy needs? Overwhelmingly, 2-1, people said, actually do what the economy needs, don't keep a symbolic promise. So the optimist in me says the politics and the economics give them plenty of room to change. The pessimist in me thinks they've already legislated them. The easy thing to do is nothing, and they just roll on through. So, I think we'll have a busy year here at the Institute.
But just another stat on the Stage 3 tax cuts. The increase in job seeker is about $1,000 a year. The increase for people earning over $200,000 from the Stage 3 tax cuts is $9,000 a year.
Big difference.
But they're contributors to society.
Lifters and leaders.
They must be more productive.
They must be more productive.
Matt, Eliza was just talking about some of the structural issues in the budget, and, we've got a revenue problem over the medium to long term. Stage 3 is kind of one element of that. It's a huge outlay, obviously. But there was a couple of other things in here, like some small tweaks to the petroleum resources rent tax, but most of that heavy lifting of structural tax reforms that a lot of economists have been calling for a long time, we haven't really seen in this budget. Can you just talk to me about the PRRT to begin with?
Yeah, so the petroleum resource rent tax, it's like a kind of sort of super profits tax on the gas industry.
A little bit, looked at the right angle.
Or perhaps better, it should be a super profits tax on the gas industry. The gas industry welcomed the changes, which probably tells you a lot about what these changes were. At a time when Australia Institute research has shown that the industry is getting up to $40 billion a year in windfall profits from the fact that, Russia decided to invade Ukraine, that it's never been more profitable than the gas industry. And yet, even with these changes, tobacco excise will collect 5 times as much as the PRRT. Visa application charges are more than we will collect from the PRRT.
The backbone of any solid budget. The visa application fee.
Beer excise tax will collect more than the entire gas industry's petroleum resource rent tax.
There you go, beer drinkers of Australia. You are the backbone of this budget.
Beer is a more important resource in Australia than gas.
And next time you hear someone complaining about migrants, think, no, those visa application fees are what funds our schools and hospitals. Next time you hear the gas industry say, we fund your schools and hospitals, think, no, it's the paperwork on the application to visit.
I think we've done the best winners and losers take of the budget just here.
So, Matt, the PRRT, obviously just very modest changes there, but we also didn't see anything like trying to scrounge back some money from fossil fuel subsidies, nothing on kind of negative gearing and
nothing like that. The only other change which was announced before the budget was around superannuation tax concessions. If you've got more than $3 million in your account, they're going to reduce...
And who among us does not?
They're going to reduce, not eliminate, the tax concession they give to those funds over $3 million. And I think I worked that out. That's about 1% of superannuation tax concessions. So it'll reduce superannuation tax concessions by 1%. So again, we're not talking about major change, we're talking about tiny incremental change.
Yeah. I can see we've got about 650 people on the line with us. Thanks for joining us. I'm not sure how many were on YouTube and Facebook, but thanks for tuning in. This is our post-budget webinar analysis today. Do make sure to put your question in the Q&A box. We're going to come to these very shortly. So, yeah, it was a lot of colour and movement on budget night and as always. But, Matt, overall, from what we've seen this morning, how is this kind of budget being received overall?
Yeah, I think it's been received reasonably well because all of the tiny steps are in the right direction. I think most people think, nothing revolutionary here, steady as she goes kind of thing. But so I think, it's not going to get marked down hugely. We still think there are a lot of missed opportunities in the budget. What's been heartening for somebody who's been working on stage 3 stuff for 5 years now, almost 6 years, is that even though the government wasn't willing to mention it, we had lots and lots of people out there wanting to ask the government about what about the stage 3 tax cuts. And for a policy that has bipartisan support, has already passed Parliament and will automatically come in without change, it's great to see that that's still being raised because those tax cuts are just terrible.
Yeah. So I'm going to go to questions from the audience now. The first one that I've got is from Kerry Willis. And they ask, before the first budget, Jim Chalmers said this one would be a well-being budget, i.e. for people and the planet. Did he deliver such a budget, Matt?
No, the well-being budget was kind of absent. They did a kind of consultation type paper with the last budget to talk about how they might do it, but it was entirely missing. And there wasn't talk. I haven't heard the Treasurer or the Finance Minister mention it at all. They may have, but I watch it pretty closely and I haven't seen anything. So it's kind of disappointing because a wellbeing budget, how we measure success, is really, really important. And, we should actually be having a wider variety of different measures in order to show how the budget is impacting the economy, how the economy is going overall, rather than just these kind of narrow measures of gross domestic product and economic growth.
Yeah, and also, and the idea of a wellbeing budget, I think it should be applauded. It says, let's take a look at what the decisions we're making in a broader context, not just the surplus. But if you wanted everyone to focus on the surplus last night, then maybe you wouldn't want to talk about wellbeing. But, to Eliza's point earlier and Matt's, if, and it's a giant if, the Treasurer did take a wellbeing lens and say, yeah, let's look at all the choices we could make here. Imagine we did have a wellbeing framework that looked at income inequality between, age groups, gender, did look at the impact of government policies on the environment, did look at things like closing Indigenous disadvantage gaps. Imagine they were the wellbeing criteria, and we said, okay, now let's take a look at stage 3. Let's give $250 billion away. How many wellbeing boxes do we tick? Oh, not many. What about increasing unemployment benefits? Oh, a lot of ticks. So I'm 100% in favour of bringing a wellbeing lens into our budgeting, and I think that's why it's vanished, because the stage 3 tax cuts, refusing to put a windfall profits tax on the gas industry, refusing to rein in subsidies for fossil fuels and tax concessions for super, all those choices don't make any sense in a wellbeing framework. And all the kind of needs we've been talking about, improving access to childcare, making education cheaper for young people, to be green ticks as far as the eye could see. So bring on the wellbeing framework, which is why I think it's vanished.
Yeah. Sorry to throw this one back to you after you just answered one, Richard, but Daniel Greats asks, the budget papers revealed the government has an unquantifiable future liability due to its indemnification of Chevron for future legal action against its failed CCS project at Gorgon. Rich and I love carbon capture and storage as a completely failed boondoggle of multiple governments. Daniel's question is, how can we react to that with anything but a giant WTF? We've kind of touched on fossil fuel subsidies and other things in here, but Are we? Why do we?
How could CCS have failed?
Oh,
it promised
well,
so much.
Yeah, let me start by saying, well done, Daniel. You've read deep into the budget papers. In fact, you've made it to one of my favourite parts of the budget papers, which is I assume this is where this is coming from, it's the uncosted Commonwealth liabilities. So any organisation has, the Australia Institute, BHP, any corporation has what's called a balance sheet where you list your assets and your liabilities. So, your assets might be money you have in the bank or, your superannuation or whatever. Your liabilities are, the lease you have on your rental property, your staff superannuation, whatever. But the Commonwealth budget or the Commonwealth government has all these enormous liabilities, that is, bills that it might have to pay. They're called contingent liabilities if something bad happens. So all sorts of bad things could happen that the Commonwealth is on the hook for. And when you try and do the government's balance sheet, how do you put a dollar value next to some of these liabilities? You can't, so you have this great little list in the back of the budget papers where you list all the things we're on the hook for, comma, if something bad happens. So if Lucas Heights nuclear reactor had a meltdown tomorrow and 100,000 people were evacuated from in and around Lucas Heights, we're on the hook for that. How much? As we should be. What would that cost us? Who knows? But, the nice folk at Treasury, make a point of reminding, don't forget we're on the hook for this. After we buy nuclear submarines, guess what happens if one of them, gets marooned on a reef in a South Pacific island nation? Or we'll just go and clean up the mess, because that'll be cheap and easy, won't it? So the budget papers have this wonderful list of kind of risks that we're on the hook for, and one that is really important that people don't realise perhaps is that all this carbon capture and storage malarkey, which is all promise, no delivery, the way that the contracts are structured, if Chevron or any fossil fuel company says, I've invented carbon capture and storage, I'm going to safely sequester millions of tonnes of CO2 under the ground, I promise, and if I'm wrong, you can pick up the tab. And the Commonwealth has literally signed these contracts, saying if it all goes pear-shaped after X years, it's
not Chevron that'll pick up the tab.
No, it's the Commonwealth. So that's what Daniel's referring to. So that's the problem. We've never had a massive spill from a solar panel. We're yet to see wind farms cause catastrophic risk to the surrounding community. But with Lucas Heights, with carbon capture and storage, with oil spills, for example, government's often on the hook for those things as well, and they're in the budget papers as these uncosted liabilities.
Can I just jump in as well while we're talking about fossil fuel subsidies? Because I don't know if you checked out the numbers for the fuel tax credit next year, $9.6 billion,
yep.
Up from 6.8 the year before.
Yeah.
Huge jump. And we did the fossil fuel subsidy report recently, and it came out, it was like an $11.6 billion fossil fuel subsidy. So can you imagine how much bigger it's going to be for next year? It was for this budget, but then also next year's budget, considering how much growth we're going to see in that subsidy.
Yeah. So that's us subsidising the use of fossil fuels by industry. But luckily, we do have the PRRT.
That's raking it in.
We need to think of a word that's smaller than tweak. I think it's flattering to say we tweaked the PRRT. I think we put a comma after nudge.
Yeah. Industry welcomed change.
We wanted behavioural change from the nudge.
Question from Anna Cifalili. Anna, if I've murdered your surname, I really apologise. Eliza, I wonder if I might put this one to you. She's asked, why do you think that the working poor were kind of completely overlooked in this budget, that if you're not receiving a welfare payment, you literally get nothing, she said. But yeah, what kind of measures are there that go beyond payments for people on low incomes that we could think about in this budget?
Yeah, I mean, I think lots of groups were overlooked, and I think that the government and the Treasurer spent a lot of time being like, we can't do everything, and so the cost of living measures are going to be really targeted, and so we saw them being really targeted at some of the most disadvantaged who are income payment recipients who are really struggling. But you're right, the working poor are under incredible pressure under this cost of living crisis. So, I think there's some of the energy bill relief package that will probably help some of the working poor families with electricity prices, which we know are really going up under this kind of inflationary environment.
And presumably things like childcare and some of those other direct measures will also
cheaper
help.
medicines.
Yeah,
cheaper medicines. Yeah, the Medicare reform. Although that goes to the eligible households are concession card holders. So I still think that's actually mostly targeted at income. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that is a huge issue. I think, we really have gradually seen the erosion of our Medicare system and bulk billing just totally disappear. And that adds incredible pressure to households who were once maybe bulk billing and now have to pay $90 for a doctor's visit. So, I think they were largely overlooked, and I think it's because the government wanted to target their spending. They didn't want to do everything, or they sold that they couldn't do everything, and so the working poor missed out.
And let me just do a quick quiz with Matt here. So, Matt, you said $9,000 in stage 3 tax cuts for people earning over 200 grand.
Mm-hmm.
Quick quiz: if I was working part time and earning 20 grand, what would I get from stage 3?
Hang on, let me do them. Carry the 4. 0.
Right. What if I was earning 30 grand?
0.
40?
You're on the minimum wage. Well done.
Yeah.
0.
Oh. So, unfortunately, the working poor, literally at the moment, are seeing, they're experiencing bracket creep too. They're seeing their average tax rate rise. Their real wages are falling. And this $250 billion in tax cuts that was invented by Scott Morrison 6 years ago
Treasurer Scott Morrison
is literally going to do nothing to help people, particularly women working part-time on low wages. Literally not a cent.
And being used to justify not doing anything.
Yeah, and then being the excuse for not spending more money on things that these groups need.
I've got 2 questions that I think are linked here, Matt, and I might send them to you. So Mara asks, isn't the government massively increasing inflation by not changing the stage 3 tax cuts? And Richard Tuffin asks, just wondering how much we could increase the rate of job seeker without impacting inflation. So
it's a really good question. It depends on by how much you're talking about increasing inflation. So there's a couple of points here. The first is that if poorer people are being massively disproportionately impacted by cost of living pressures and, struggling on the verge of homelessness, even if it was inflationary, I think we have a moral obligation to help those people anyway, right? So, inflation has costs, but so does being homeless, so does not having a job. These all are massive costs as well. But, the stage 3 tax cuts, the problem with those is not so much of whether they'll be inflationary or not, it's that they just go almost overwhelmingly to high income earners. Over the next 10 years, they'll cost $250 billion. Half of that will go to people earning over $180,000 a year. Half of those tax cuts go to people earning over $180,000 a year. These are not the people that the government should be targeting cost of living relief to. And so, is it inflationary? Yeah, it'll be slightly inflationary. The stage 3 tax cuts will be inflationary. But will it? The question is if we were to say double unemployment benefits and bring them up above the poverty line, would that be inflationary? Yeah, a bit. Probably less than the stage 3 tax cuts actually, because that would cost a lot less. And is that okay? Well, if getting people out of poverty, and poverty is a policy choice at this point. There's a moral question there rather than just an economic one.
Yeah, and to Eliza's point earlier, groups are deliberately being played off against each other. Who are the worthy poor? Who are the unworthy poor? Are we helping the young? Are we helping the old? Are we helping the women? What we need to do is help people in poverty. And we know how to do that. The issue which, the media and I think the Liberal Party are very keen to do is say, how will each particular thing, will it cause inflation or won't it? So 2 things there. One, I didn't hear anyone say that $250 billion in submarines was going to be inflationary. Oh no, that's the responsible spending.
Yeah.
Right. It's the couple of billion helping the poor. Oh, that's going to tip it over the edge. So, we have to be really careful here. We don't think that submarines are going to cause inflation. We don't think stage 3 tax cuts are going to cause inflation. But boy, if we're too generous to the unemployed, oh well,
to the end.
Oh, the sky is falling. So there's a structural thing there that, as luck would have it, powerful groups that are happy to receive a lot of money are good at minimising discussion about how that might affect inflation. Less powerful groups that get a little bit of money have no similar ability to massage the media and political environment, so they get blamed. That's one thing. The other thing is that we can talk about would increase, like say we doubled unemployment benefits tomorrow. We could afford to do that, we choose not to. Would that be inflationary? Yeah, all other things being equal, it would. But if we did that and we scrapped the stage 3 tax cuts at the same time, would it be inflationary? No, it wouldn't. So, A, we get told to look at particular things, and then B, we get told we're not allowed to look at them as a package. And again, this is no accident. This is deliberate spin. This is deliberate political strategy to keep most people punching down and simultaneously protect those that are about to rake it in, whether it's by selling subs or getting stage 3 tax cuts.
Yeah, so the next question I've got is from Liz Glab, and she's asking about the surplus. So I think I mentioned earlier the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, has been given what I think is multiple opportunities to brag about delivering a budget surplus, and has really chosen to downplay it for, I think, a number of reasons, not just because it's modest, but also something that the Australia Institute has discussed for a long time is Liz's question. Why is there such an obsession with a surplus? And isn't it true that deficits are not necessarily bad? Isn't it more a matter of how the money is spent, Matt?
Yeah, it's how the money is spent, but it's also where the economy is at. We went into and we had huge deficits during the pandemic recession. We had big deficits during the GFC. We had big deficits if you go way back to the 90s when we had the 90s recession. And those deficits were necessary in order to stimulate the economy. In fact, it would have been entirely economically reckless not to run a deficit when the economy is in trouble. Also incredibly difficult, right? You've got your tax revenues collapsing, you're having to spend more. But that's the main way the government basically inflates the economy at a time when it desperately needs to grow, because you have rapidly rising unemployment. So absolutely, a deficit is a tool. Whether you have a surplus or a deficit, that's just simply a tool to manage the macroeconomy. It's not an objective. It's like owning a shovel, right? And then, putting it on the wall and going, look at my great shovel. You buy a shovel to dig dirt, right? You don't buy a shovel. Well, maybe there are shovel fanciers out there. I don't know. There's a magazine for everything. But you don't buy a shovel in order just to admire it. And a deficit and a surplus is exactly the same. It's just a tool to achieve something else.
And just on this surplus thing, and maybe why he hasn't chosen to draw so much attention to this. I mean, it's for the year 2022-23, so it's the year that's almost over, and it primarily has been driven by, and I think we mentioned it before, but like commodity prices and low unemployment, things that the government doesn't have a lot of control over. So, it's kind of a matter of luck that I think that we've ended up in this position, and not a matter of like the government spending a lot of time on like tax and spending measures to get a surplus. So drawing too much attention to this, I think, really does overemphasize the how positive a surplus is or versus a deficit. But secondly, it would create a whole lot of weaknesses for them because they're not necessarily responsible.
But can I just say, Angus Taylor running around saying a drover's dog could run a surplus? I mean, that's really mean on Angus Taylor because, they had 9 years and they tried. Let me put this, they tried to run a surplus and they couldn't. So if a drover's dog can get a surplus, but them try and can't. I mean, what does that say?
So you think that's Angus having a go?
I think that's Angus having a go at the Liberal Party. Yeah, Josh Frydenberg
and Scott Morrison. Yep. Interesting.
But Richard, I know you've spoken to Jim Chalmers in the past about this at some Australia Institute events, and I think, would it be fair to say he probably shares a similar view to us, that it shouldn't be the be-all and end-all, and perhaps Labor's trying to put this to bed as some kind of litmus test of economic management?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that's kind of the real problem, that economists know of all stripes. Economists know budget deficits are not and surpluses aren't the be all and end all. Jim Chalmers knew that. I don't know if Scott Morrison knew that, right? But everyone's sensible.
Probably lie about it.
Right? Yeah, if he did know, he wouldn't tell you. So, but there's this whole political consciousness that says that's not how it works. And I think all sorts of sciences have these problems. People think they know how their heart works. People think they know how their brain works. And then there's people who know how your heart and your brain works. They're like, yeah, no, you're really not even close there, people. So it's not uncommon that, people with technocratic expertise think things that people that don't have that expertise think. But unfortunately, it's sort of become this incredible cultural symbol in Australia. And, I've said this so many times, but the last US president to deliver a budget surplus was Bill Clinton. No one cares. The last UK Prime Minister to deliver a budget surplus was Tony Blair. Most people watching this can't remember when that was, right? No one else in the world cares. But in Australia, it's kind of become this defining symbol of economicsness, which, we're all kind of stuck with. So, yeah, in Jim Chalmers' defence, I think he's not going out of his way to make a big deal out of it. He has introduced this wellbeing framework. I think they are trying to take the heat out of this is the be-all and end-all. But apart from the Australia Institute and a small number of other people that wake up and care about these things, no, the government of the day doesn't have a lot of champions out there saying, stop talking about the budget surplus all the time. Yeah. So I think it is a good step. I think that they do understand, but they're stuck with a political reality that is unrelated to the economic reality. And then just to be a little cynical, they know they're going to be in deficit next year. Yeah. So if he goes out and crows too loudly now, he'll be eating that next year.
Yeah. And just in defence of drovers' dogs, I believe there's a couple of farmers out there on social media in defence of just how switched on a drover's dog is and what it can accomplish as well.
Better than Josh Frydenberg.
And they're not even getting the tax cut.
Eliza, hang on one second. Eliza, the Centre for Future Work has done quite a bit of work around profits driving inflation, as has the Australia Institute. There's a couple of questions in here around inflationary pressures and the critique of profit being a driver of that. How important is that in the context of this budget?
I think it's a really important framing context for analysis, right? When we get caught up in the weeds about, the inflationary impact of some of this kind of meagre increase to our income support payment systems, and when we get kind of caught in the weeds on that, we're missing this overall picture, which is that the inflationary impact is going to be minimal because, the amount of people receiving these benefits are not that many compared to the rest of the economy. Also, it's not very much money. We're playing people off each other. And of course, as we've talked about already, the stage 3 income tax cuts are going to have huge inflationary impacts as well. We're not talking about the inflationary pressure of that. Again, if we were concerned about the inflationary impact of profits, which have, our research found contributed 69% to the inflation crisis, and what were wages? It was like
15 to 18.
Then what we'd be doing is making, for example, the PRRT more effective, because that would be really reining in profits. We'd have a windfall profit tax on, businesses that are raking in as a result of the inflationary
but I've heard
environment.
That the gas industry are forced to take those profits. They're forced to take those prices.
They're doing a burdensome task.
They're doing, the poor gas industry, they have to make those profits. They're being reverse mugged. People are shoving money into their pockets.
But Eliza makes a really important point, and that is, we've talked about how the unemployed are causing inflation if we pay them a slightly bigger pittance. We're not talking about Qantas jacking up airfares, and literally increasing prices, or the electricity companies, like bank profits. Like, inflation comes when people increase the price of things. Who is it that increases the price of things? companies.
You mean not the unemployed?
Not the unemployed, right. So the idea that we should kind of obsess about the micro detail of the inflationary impact of a tiny increase in the unemployment benefit and literally dismiss the idea that profits might be driving inflation as, oh, come on, that's not how things work. I mean, again, that just highlights kind of how broken so much economic commentary in Australia is.
Lisa Kane has a question, which is, when is the Labor government going to get serious about taxing gas and carbon profits? And what accounts for its apparent reluctance to do so
now, I think.
at this juncture? But I didn't even see a mention of climate change in the Treasurer's speech. Did I miss something?
I don't think it was there at all, no. Yeah, look, I mean, when are they going to... I wish they had already. Like, you know, it's kind of, the cynic in me says never, but, you know, the optimist in me and the person who sort of, you know, tries to put policy out there and make change sort of hopes that will happen. But it's a hard slog. You know, I mean, a carbon price, we know a carbon tax would be an incredibly effective way of reducing our emissions. It would ultimately be a lot less costly than the weird, strange, complicated methods that we choose in order to obscure, you know, the fact that we don't have a carbon tax or, you know, that we don't want one.
And just to be clear, we did used to have a price on carbon that was very effective, and it raised revenue,
and
the economy
grew,
reduced emissions, jobs grew.
Yeah.
But can't do that anymore, Richard.
No, and I hate to say it, it's worse than that, Eb. It's not that we're not taxing gas. And to give you some context, we export more gas than Qatar. We're the biggest exporter of LNG in the world. They're the second biggest exporter of LNG in the world. We export more than them. They collect 20 times more tax on gas than us. Whoops. I don't know how that happened year after year.
But, you know, the gas industry will flee Qatar if it increases to 20 times what we do.
Right, so there's step one. Like, we don't collect a lot of tax, but as Eliza said, like, we're still subsidising the use of fossil fuels in Australia. You know, in the October mini-budget, Labor announced a $1.9 billion subsidy for a gas refining plant, you know, a petrochemical plant, in Darwin. $1.9 billion subsidy, which the Northern Territory government's busy running around scratching out the word petrochemical from all of the descriptions of the project. So it's worse than when will we start taxing it? It's when will we stop subsidising it? I mean, why are we collecting so much tax on tobacco? Because we want to, and we tell ourselves it's because by taxing something we discourage it. So we know it works.
Yeah, it has great benefits.
Tony Abbott increased the tax on tobacco because he wanted to change behaviour. We've just increased the price of tobacco. Again, coming back to, is it inflationary or not? With unemployment benefits, unemployed people are far more likely to be smoking, unfortunately. You know, lower income people are more likely to be smoking. And we're going to tax the poor with very, very high taxes on tobacco. Yet we kind of say, oh, somehow it would be bad to tax something like gas expansion.
Which, to be clear, is selling our own resources.
Yeah, but also we're trying to... Remember the whole idea that we're transitioning away from fossil fuels?
Yeah.
Here's a hint. You transition away from fossil fuels by developing less of them.
You mean going away from them?
Transition away, it's that away bit that gets lost. So imagine we did put a tax on gas and it did discourage investment. That's the point. That's why we've got a tax on tobacco. So we know how to design tax policies to encourage to encourage or discourage things. We know that subsidies for nicotine patches work. We know that taxes on tobacco work. If, and it's a giant if, we wanted to discourage expansion of the fossil fuel industry, we'd be taxing it. Are we doing that? No, we're subsidising it. Why is that? Well, because we're not transitioning away from it, we're transitioning towards it.
Yeah. I've got a couple of follow-up questions about young people, Eliza, and what's been in the budget for them. But in particular, the skills shortage and any measures around that and encouraging young people to get into skills and training and higher education, I guess.
Yes, I did look in the budget papers for tertiary education, policy changes and things like that. found basically nothing. I think I wasn't really expecting to see anything in this budget for universities and for TAFE and vocational education and training, because both of them are kind of under review at the moment. So the Minister for Education has committed to this Universities Accord process, which is basically a review of university funding, what's working, what's not, how do we make it more accessible, affordable for students, how do we improve employment relations at our universities. So, it wouldn't really make sense for them to do a lot in that space, I suppose. But yeah, we're seeing, so not a lot of change for universities. In terms of TAFE, there's the National Skills Agreement and Jobs and Skills Australia, which are also newer kind of Labor government commitments. There's been some funding put towards the National Skills Agreement, which is about negotiating and aiding between states, territories and the federal government for spending. Not a lot of progress in this area, but I think this is a wait and see.
Of an increase in the fee-free places, I think, in the budget,
which
again will lower the price of TAFE education, which lowers the CPI.
But nothing major. Considering the kind of big structural and policy mismanagement history of our tertiary education system, we haven't really seen anything, just a nudge.
The next question is from Peter Newbound, and she asks, why isn't the government investing directly in public housing? And the Housing Australia Future Fund seems like nothing but a gamble, but they still let people put a minimal deposit on an investment property and then let them hike up rents to cover their mortgages. Matt, you've written a lot about housing in the last couple of weeks and what the government could do to address affordability. What kind of measures did we see in this budget?
Look, the same kind of measures that we've seen for the last decade. Of housing affordability, and we like to call it housing affordability because we don't like to say that house prices are too high, because that might imply that we don't want house prices to be high and then they might go down, and that's political suicide. But the reality is the housing market is so out of whack now that it needs serious structural reform, and neither of the major parties look like they want to actually do anything. So what they do is they put up policies that they can list off when a journalist asks them a question to say that they're concerned about housing affordability, but don't actually do anything. If they wanted to do it, you know what they could do? They could borrow money and build houses. That's what the rest of us do.
Sorry, go back over that again, Matt. I couldn't
it's
follow.
Really complicated, right? You go and you borrow money and you pay interest, and let's face it, the federal government pays the lowest amount of interest of anybody, and then you could build houses. You could build houses and then rent them out.
Radical.
At low rates.
Has this been tried?
I have heard that back in the 50s, 60s and 70s, way back in the distant past, when, home ownership rates were expanding and housing was a lot cheaper, that's what they did, and that's what they need to go back to. They need to borrow money and build houses. And guess what? They'll have an asset. If you ask for advice, financial advice from your parents, they'll tell you, save up a deposit and buy a house. Great investment. Everybody talks about what a great investment housing is. The one group that don't think housing is a good investment is government. They borrow at the cheapest rate.
Oh, it's too hard, man.
It's too difficult.
It's all what I think we need to do is create an incentive regime where we can create a fund.
Is we're going to increase the depreciation rate, lower the withholding tax. We're going to create a fund.
And you've lost me.
And if we do all that, maybe someone else will borrow money and build a house.
Exactly right.
Fantastic.
Nothing to see here.
No, what could go wrong?
Love all those middlemen.
Complicated incentives that ultimately don't do anything, and they're complicated so you can't actually dig into them and work out how they're failing. The solution is simple: build more public housing, and also get rid of negative gearing and capital gains tax discount. Stop subsidising investors to outbid owner-occupiers.
And Canberra trivia here. Ebony, what are the vast majority of small 3-bedroom brick houses in Canberra known as?
Oh, government housing.
Gubbies.
Ex-gubbies.
Gubbies, because basically the government built
them.
Entire suburbs here in Canberra.
They cost more than $1 million now in some suburbs of Canberra.
Yeah, so it's not a radical idea, but
you mean they're an investment that goes up in price? Terrible
asset. Speaking of assets, and Defence housing is public housing that we invest in quite a bit. But Dave Rowe has a question, Richard. Is defence spending classed as an asset or an expense?
Oh, good question. Mainly an expense. And this is really, we've got some great questions coming in. So in the budget papers and in any set of accounts, private or public, we usually kind of draw a distinction between kind of recurrent expenditure, so money spent on things that get used up each year, and assets that we purchase. And if the assets have a sort of longer life, then we record them differently in our accounts. So the overwhelming percentage of the defence budget is actually the salaries of the defence personnel. So that's all an expense. But the Defence Department does own a lot of assets. And I must admit, I've never looked into the depreciation schedule for submarines. But if you think about it...
There will be one.
Yeah, because these are long-lived assets. So there's a bit of both in there. But no, most of it is an expense. But not inflationary.
Yeah.
That's the money that we give to the unemployed.
And always necessary. We can never seem to not afford it.
No. We're never short of a buck for, some... And we'll actually go back to the subs. Like a couple of years ago, the Defence Department didn't want nuclear submarines. They were asked, they didn't want them. They thought they were too expensive, we didn't need them. And that's because a few years ago, the Defence Department thought that if it had nuclear submarines, it would have to spend less money on other things. And the Defence Department thought, no, we'd actually rather have, more soldiers, more aeroplanes, more ships, more tanks, whatever. So when the Defence Department thought that it had some kind of agency over the decision, it thought nuclear submarines were a crap idea. It was only when Scott Morrison came along and went, what if you could have it all?
Why not both?
What if you have both? If you can have nuclear submarines and all the other lollies, all of a sudden the Defence Department, we can't live without nuclear subs.
Yeah.
But when they thought it was going to cost them their other thingamajigs, they didn't want a bar of it.
Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap it up, but thank you all for your wonderful questions. Sorry that we didn't get to all of them. Don't forget to subscribe to the Australia Institute's newsletter to receive our big post-budget analysis straight to your inbox. This was recorded live on Wednesday the 10th of May 2023, and things may have changed since recording. This has been a special webinar episode of Follow the Money. All our webinars are free and available on the Australia Institute's YouTube channel at australiainstitute.tv. And you can find all our latest research and content at australiainstitute.org.au. And we're on Twitter at the Oz Institute with an AUS. My Twitter handle is Ebony_Bennett with a _NTT. Richard Dennis is at RDNS_TAI. Matt Grudnoff is at Matt Grudnoff. And Eliza Littleton is at Eliza Littleton. This episode was produced by Jennifer Macy. Our theme music is by Jonathan McFeet from Pulse and Thrum, with additional music from Blue Dot Sessions. Thanks for listening.